Welcome to our channel, where unforgettable stories come to life. Today, we have a gripping tale that will leave you on the edge of your seat. But before we dive in, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an exciting story like this one. Tomorrow's story is just as thrilling, so stay tuned and let's get into today's unforgettable journey. The Royal Guard's Forbidden Act, breaking protocol to save a child's life. It was a warm June afternoon at Buckingham Palace, and the sun beat down relentlessly as tourists gathered along the barriers. Lance Corporal Harford stood still, his scarlet uniform absorbing the heat, but his face betrayed nothing. 8 years of service in the U.S. Royal Guard had taught him that ceremonial duty wasn't just about enduring the physical strain of standing still. It required a unique awareness, one that made him always alert, despite his outward composure. While most tourists believed the guard saw nothing, Harford had perfected the art of observing everything without moving a muscle. As the crowd shifted and murmured, Harford's sharp peripheral vision caught something that instantly registered as different. A woman, in her mid-30s, dressed expensively with blonde hair styled carefully, gripped the shoulder of a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The child, however, didn't move with the usual excitement that most children displayed. While visiting the palace, his small shoulders were hunched inward, his posture unusually cautious, as if he was trying to shrink into himself. "Isn't this exciting, Max?" the woman, Jessica, said. Her voice was loud and artificial, a tone Harford recognized from his military interrogation training, the kind of voice used when someone was trying too hard to sound cheerful, but the tension in their words was palpable. The boy, Max, nodded, without enthusiasm. His eyes were downcast, avoiding any direct contact with those around him. Despite the warm weather that had most tourists dressed in shorts and t-shirts, Max wore long sleeves and jeans, a curious choice considering the oppressive heat. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, but he didn't complain. He didn't ask for a drink or a break. He just moved along quietly beside Jessica. Harford's trained eyes caught the way Jessica's hand moved down Max's back as they walked through the crowd, lingering in places where a casual touch shouldn't remain. Max flinched slightly, the movement barely noticeable, but to Harford, it sent up an alarm bell. It wasn't just the flinch, it was the boy's entire demeanor. Harford had seen that look before, not in the calm streets of London but in war zones. It was the look of someone who was always on edge, always calculating risk, always wondering if the next moment might be a dangerous one. As Max's face turned toward the palace, Harford caught a brief glimpse of it. Neutral, almost expressionless, but there was something else there, something that sent a chill down his spine. Resignation. Max's high collar shifted slightly, revealing a cluster of red scratches along his neck. The pattern was unmistakable, the kind of marks left by fingernails by an adult's hands. Harford's military training had included recognizing signs of abuse, both physical and psychological. He knew exactly what those scratches meant. The knowledge was crystal clear, and yet the professional guard in him remained neutral, focused solely on his duty, even as his mind processed the horrifying reality of what was unfolding before him. As Jessica continued to lead Max through the crowd, her hand never leaving his body, Harford's instinct for protection kicked in. She guided him with a possessive grip, her fingers tightening around his arm as they moved closer to the front of the crowd. "Stay close, sweetheart," she murmured in a tone that was meant to sound sweet but had an unmistakable edge. A warning. Harford's eyes narrowed as he cataloged every detail. The way Max's body stiffened under Jessica's grip, the way his eyes darted nervously from side to side, and the way he swallowed hard as Jessica leaned down, whispering something inaudible. In his ear, Harford knew something was wrong. The boy's behavior, the way he kept his distance, the signs of physical and emotional strain, everything pointed to a troubling truth. But he couldn't intervene just yet. Not without more proof. He had to remain in his post, Still, unmoving, the guard he was trained to be. But his mind was racing, analyzing, and calculating the next steps in his head. The silence in the crowd was broken only by the faint sound of voices. But Harford's focus remained entirely on Jessica and Max. It was in that moment, that single exchange of looks between Harford and the boy, that he made a decision. Something in Max's eyes, the flash of fear, of helplessness, struck Harford to his core. He couldn't ignore it. He had seen too much to turn away from this. As the crowd shifted again, Harford's focus on Jessica never wavered. He kept cataloging every detail, every move she made. And as Max's body language grew more closed off, Harford knew the time would come for him to step out of his ceremonial role and take action. For now, though, he remained still, watching, waiting, until the moment when the boy's silent plea would be answered. Tom Harford's gaze never wavered from the scene unfolding before him. The crowd shifted, a mix of excited tourists and unsuspecting visitors, but Harford's attention was fixed on Jessica and Max. His peripheral vision never left them, not even when the noise of the bustling courtyard tried to pull him away. Harford had seen his fair share of chaos, but the stillness of the boy, the tension in his tiny body, spoke volumes. As the tourists passed by, Harford noticed a few people glancing toward Max, confused by his behavior. The boy remained unnervingly quiet, his hands clenched tightly at his sides, his shoulders tense. Jessica kept up the facade of the loving guardian, asking Max if he was excited to see the royal guard, her voice a forced cheerfulness that couldn't mask the underlying menace in her tone. Harford recognized it instantly, the same tone used by interrogators to manipulate their subjects. Max wasn't excited. He wasn't even looking at the guards anymore. His focus was solely on his feet, his eyes avoiding everyone around him, and most importantly, avoiding Jessica's gaze. Harford's thoughts were interrupted as a gentle voice from behind him caught his attention. An elderly woman, concerned by the boy's unusual behavior, spoke up, offering a sympathetic smile to Max. "It's a warm day for long sleeves, dear," she said, her voice kind and curious. "Are you sure you're comfortable?" Jessica, her smile tight, immediately intervened. "Oh, he has sensitive skin," she said smoothly, brushing off the concern. "Burns easily in the sun, poor thing." Max nodded silently, the automatic response of a child trained to play a part, to hide his pain. His eyes flickered toward the woman briefly, but he quickly lowered them again, seemingly afraid to say anything that might provoke Jessica. The crowd continued to bustle, but Harford's focus had narrowed even further. He watched as Jessica's hand slid down Max's back again, but this time it lingered too long. The boy flinched, his entire body tensing as if he couldn't escape the unwanted touch. Harford felt his muscles tighten. The subtle signs were clear, the tension in Max's body, the way his eyes darted nervously, the almost imperceptible withdrawal into himself. It was the same dissociative behavior Harford had seen in combat zones, when civilians endured trauma they couldn't escape. Jessica leaned down, whispering something in Max's ear, her hand curling possessively into his hair, pulling him closer. Harford saw the boy's eyes close briefly, his body stiffening. It was a clear attempt to withdraw from the reality he was trapped in. The boy was trying to escape, to retreat into a safe mental space, even though he couldn't physically escape. Jessica's grip. As the group moved closer to the barrier where the royal guard stood, Max's discomfort was undeniable. Harford could see it. The boy's entire demeanor was one of dread. His gaze flickered nervously around, unable to focus on anything for long. His breath was shallow, his chest rising and falling quickly, but there was no escape for him. The grip on his neck tightened again, this time in a way that couldn't be mistaken for anything other than control. "Look, sweetheart," Jessica said loudly, almost too loudly, as if to prove something to the onlookers. "This is what you've been waiting for, a real royal guard." Her hand slid down Max's neck once more, curling into the fabric of his collar. Max didn't respond. He didn't look up. Harford caught the briefest flicker of something in the boy's eyes. Fear, a raw, unspoken plea for help. but it was gone in an instant, replaced by the familiar mask of compliance. Harford's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a nervous child in need of some attention. This was something much darker, something he had been trained to recognize. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to act. But with his ceremonial duty weighing heavy, Harford knew he had to choose the right moment. Just then, a voice from a nearby tourist interrupted the scene. "Excuse me, is everything okay?" The woman, a young mother, spoke gently, but her tone was filled with concern. She had been watching Jessica's behavior for a while and something wasn't right. "Your boy doesn't seem quite well. Are you sure he's okay?" Max froze, looking up toward the woman for the briefest moment. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He glanced back at Jessica, seeking permission to speak, but Jessica's hand immediately tightened around his arm. She flashed a tight, rehearsed smile to the woman. "Oh, he's just shy," she said, brushing off the concern. "Nothing to worry about." But Harford knew better. The signs were clear now. The boy was scared, terrified even. And it wasn't because he was shy. It was because he was trapped. As the crowd continued to shift and the royal guard remained steadfast in his position, Harford felt the weight of the decision before him. His training, his duty, had always been about control, about maintaining order. But in that moment, staring at Max's wide, fearful eyes, Harford knew something more important than tradition needed to be done. He stepped forward, and as he did, the crowd parted, allowing him to move toward Jessica and Max. He wasn't just a ceremonial guard anymore. He was a soldier, trained to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And in that moment, Max needed him more than ever. The tension in the air was thick now. Harford's eyes remained locked on Jessica, but his mind was far from still. The boy, Max, wasn't just an anxious child. He was a trapped soul, desperately trying to stay out of reach, trapped under the iron grip of someone who didn't have a shred of compassion. Harford had seen this before, in war zones, in places where survival meant pretending you weren't in danger. But this was different. This was a child who couldn't escape. Jessica, ever the performer, had noticed the rising concern from the crowd. She quickly adjusted her behavior, putting on a false, exaggerated display of motherhood. With a saccharine smile, she turned to Max. "You've been such a good boy today," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "I think you've earned this treat." She pulled an ice cream from her designer bag, the act so calculated that Harford could almost see the manipulation in it. It wasn't a treat, it was a tool, a way to remind Max of his place. Max accepted the ice cream with a stiff nod, mumbling a quiet, "Thank you." His eyes flickered nervously toward Jessica, seeking approval, before he carefully began to eat. But it wasn't about the ice cream. It was about control. Jessica's fingers were already at his neck again, curling possessively into his hair. It wasn't a loving gesture. It was an assertion of power, a reminder that Max was never free to be a child. Harford's jaw tightened and his heart clenched. Everything about this scene felt wrong. The boy, the woman, the way Jessica was manipulating the crowd, pretending to be the perfect guardian. It was all a facade. And beneath it, Harford knew that Max was crying out for help in ways words couldn't express. Jessica leaned down, whispering something in Max's ear that Harford couldn't hear, but he saw the reaction in the boy. Max's body went still, a kind of frozen surrender. His shoulders slumped, and his eyes fluttered shut as if to block out the world, as if closing his eyes could shut off the nightmare he was living. Harford had seen this before too. It was the response of someone who had learned not to fight anymore, someone who had given up on escape. The moment Max's eyes opened again, Harford caught the briefest glimpse of resignation. His small, tired face showed everything. There was no hope left in those eyes, just the resignation of someone who had already given up. The scene was becoming unbearable. Harford's instincts were screaming at him, telling him to act. But he couldn't. Not yet. His ceremonial duties demanded a calm exterior, but every fiber of his being was ready to snap into action. Max needed help, and Harford was the only one who could give it. But then something shifted. A voice, a simple question broke through the tension. "Excuse me," came a woman's voice from behind him. Harford glanced over, catching sight of an elderly couple who had been watching Max with increasing concern. The woman smiled gently at Max. "Such a warm day for long sleeves, dear," she said, offering him a concerned glance. "Are you feeling okay?" Jessica's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, he has sensitive skin," she said smoothly, her tone too practiced, too rehearsed. "He burns easily in the sun, poor thing." Max didn't answer. His face was downcast, his body rigid. The simple question from the elderly woman had caused a slight shift in Max's demeanor. He seemed almost on the verge of saying something. But Jessica's hand shot to his back, an unspoken warning for him to stay silent. Harford's grip tightened around his rifle, his mind racing. He knew this wasn't just about a child in the heat. This was about control, manipulation, and fear. He had seen this behavior before, child abuse hidden behind carefully crafted facades. But Harford couldn't just stand by and watch. He knew the boy was in danger. He had to intervene. As the crowd shifted and tourists moved around, Jessica pulled Max closer, guiding him forward. "Let's move closer to see the changing ceremony," she announced loudly, as though trying to justify their proximity to the royal guards. Max, however, didn't seem excited. He didn't even look at the guards. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground. Harford noticed the way Jessica's hand slid down Max's back again, fingers lingering in a possessive grip. It was becoming harder and harder to ignore the obvious signs of abuse. The boy's silence, the way he physically flinched whenever Jessica's hand brushed too close to his body, it was all too telling. Then Jessica leaned down, whispering again in Max's ear. "Remember what we practiced," she said softly, so only he could hear. Harford couldn't hear her exact words, but he saw the way Max's body stiffened even more. This was it, the final warning. Max was being coerced into silence, into compliance, and Harford couldn't let it continue. Without thinking, Harford made his move. His boots hit the ground with authority, and in a flash he was crossing the barrier. The tourists gasped as they parted to let him through, their phones quickly turning toward him. But Harford didn't care. His focus was entirely on Jessica and the frightened boy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His military training kicked in. "Release the boy," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the air. It was a direct command, one that made Jessica stop dead in her tracks. For a moment, there was silence. Jessica, caught off guard, hesitated, her grip tightening on Max's arm. "This is none of your business," she spat, her face twisting into a sneer. "Get back to your post, you have no authority here." Harford's gaze never left her, his body still as a statue, but his mind was far from still. He had seen enough. This wasn't about protocol anymore. It was about saving the child. "Release him," Harford repeated, stepping closer, his voice a low, unwavering command. The crowd fell silent. Jessica's bravado was crumbling. Harford's presence was commanding, and with one final deliberate step, he made sure his authority was felt. This was no longer about tradition. It was about doing what was right. Jessica's posture stiffened as Harford took another deliberate step closer. The tension in the air was palpable. Her grip on Max's arm tightened, her fingers digging in as she tried to steer him away from Harford's unwavering authority. "You don't know who I am," she spat, her voice rising. "You have no idea what you're doing." Harford didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto hers with a calm intensity, his military training guiding every move. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he replied firmly. "Release the boy, now." Jessica's face contorted with fury, her veneer of civility slipping. "You're making a mistake," she hissed, her voice thick with venom. "This is none of your business. He's just a child. He's confused. I'm his aunt, and I've done nothing wrong." Max's eyes flickered toward Harford, a momentary flash of hope in them, before quickly looking away. Harford saw it, the desperation in the boy's gaze. He didn't have much time. Jessica's words were no longer just an attempt at controlling the situation. They were a last-ditch effort to maintain her grip on the boy. Her facade was crumbling. The crowd, once oblivious, was now fully aware of the confrontation unfolding before them. Eyes darted between Harford, Jessica, and the terrified child. Phones began to click, capturing the moment, but Harford barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the child, on Max, whose small body was now visibly trembling. "Please," Max whispered, his voice barely audible, but it cut through the silence. "Help me." It was the first time he had spoken in what felt like an eternity, and it was enough to push Harford into action. Jessica, sensing the shift, attempted to pull Max away, but Harford was already moving. With a swift motion, he reached out, grasping Jessica's arm with the strength of years of military discipline. She gasped, her eyes wide with shock as he pulled her away from Max. "Enough!" Harford's voice rang out, firm and commanding. "Let go of him." Max, now free from her grip, stumbled forward slightly, but Harford was there in an instant, placing a hand on his shoulder to steady him. The boy flinched at the touch, but Harford's voice was soft, steady, the calm in the storm. "You're safe now," he said gently. "You're not alone." Jessica, meanwhile, was seething with rage, her entire body trembling. "You're ruining everything," she shouted, her voice cracking with fury. "This is my family. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Harford replied coldly, his grip tightening on her arm. "And what you've done is unforgivable." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd as Jessica's carefully constructed persona shattered. Before their eyes, she was no longer the loving aunt, the kind woman taking her nephew to see the guards. She was something far darker, far more dangerous. Jessica's face turned pale as the reality of the situation hit her. "You have no idea who I am," she spat, her voice filled with venom. "My brother is on the city council. You'll pay for this." Harford's jaw tightened, but he remained calm. He wasn't here to play games with someone like Jessica. "You'll pay for what you've done to this boy," he said flatly. His voice was unwavering, the authority of a soldier who had seen much worse than this. Before Jessica could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the tension. Harford glanced over his shoulder, and his heart sank as he saw two palace security officers walking toward them, their expressions grim but professional. They had been called by concerned witnesses, and now they were here. But Harford knew it wasn't over yet. Jessica, sensing her time was running out, made one last attempt to maintain control. She pulled herself up straight, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "This is ridiculous," she snarled. "You have no right to do this. I'll have you thrown out of here. You'll lose your job." But Harford wasn't backing down. His voice remained cold, devoid of emotion. "I don't need a job to do what's right," he said simply. "And what's right is protecting this boy. You're done here." Max, still standing behind Harford, looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. The boy had been through so much already, but in this moment, he was finally free. Harford could see the weight of the fear starting to lift from Max's shoulders, even if just a little. As the security officers reached them, Jessica's demeanor shifted one final time. The once confident woman was now unraveling, her hands shaking as she tried to push past Harford, desperate to escape. But the officers quickly moved to block her path. "You're under arrest," one of the officers said, their voice flat and firm. Jessica froze, her face draining of color. "No," she whispered, barely audible. "This can't be happening." "It is," Harford said, his tone unwavering. "And it's exactly what you deserve." With Jessica now being escorted away by security, Harford took a moment to look at Max, who was standing tall, his small frame no longer cowering under the weight of fear. Harford's heart swelled with something he hadn't expected, relief, and a sense of duty fulfilled. As Max looked up at him, his face still marked by the pain of his past, he whispered one simple, fragile word. "Thank you." Harford nodded, his grip on the boy's shoulder firm but gentle. "You're safe now," he assured him. knowing that this moment would mark the beginning of Max's healing, and perhaps his own redemption. As the security officers moved to arrest Jessica, Harford stayed by Max's side, his protective stance unwavering. The boy, still trembling, clung to his uniform, the weight of what had just happened settling into his small body. Harford could feel the tension in the air, but he wasn't about to let go. He knew that for Max this was a moment of liberation, and he wasn't going to allow anyone to take that away from him. Jessica was no longer the confident, in-control woman who had first arrived at Buckingham Palace. Her carefully constructed facade of a loving aunt had shattered. Now she was nothing more than a frightened criminal caught in the act. As the officers moved her toward the palace gates, Jessica's voice broke through the crowd, pleading and angry. "You have no idea who I am," she screamed. "You'll regret this, I'll make sure of it." But Harford didn't flinch. He'd heard worse in the field, faced much worse in combat, and yet in that moment all he could think about was Max. His attention never wavered. The boy, still clutching his back, still standing just behind Harford, was finally free. The dear nightmare that had haunted him for so long was, for the first time, coming to an end. Max lifted his head slightly, his eyes darting around the scene. He was still on edge, but there was a glimmer of hope now, a light in his expression that Harford hadn't seen before. It wasn't much, but it was something. The boy had been through hell, and now he was being given a chance to heal. Harford's chest tightened. It was a small victory, but one that would mean everything for Max. A few tourists, having witnessed the entire exchange, whispered among themselves. They were still in shock, still processing what they had just seen. But as the minutes ticked by and the reality of what had happened set in, many began to approach Harford. Some offered their words of support, some just watched silently, but Harford remained focused. He didn't need gratitude. He didn't need praise. He needed Max to know that he was safe, that this was over. The security officers led Jessica away, her hands cuffed tightly behind her back, her face a twisted mask. Of rage and disbelief, she shot one last venomous glare at Harford, but he didn't look away. He kept his eyes fixed on her, a silent promise that this would be the last time she'd hurt anyone. Max, however, was still holding his ground, eyes wide, his body tense. Harford crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's level, ensuring their eyes met. "You're safe now," he said softly, his voice carrying a calm reassurance. "No one will hurt you again. You're not alone." Max swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "I thought no one would believe me," he whispered. "She told me I was just a kid, that no one would listen." Harford's heart sank, but he didn't show it. He wanted to tell Max that things would be okay, but the reality was the road ahead would be long. "You're wrong about that," Harford said gently, reaching out to place a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I believed you. And so did a lot of other people. You're stronger than you think, Max." Max looked up at him, a flicker of hope dancing in his eyes. The boy wasn't free from the weight of his past, but in that moment, Harford knew he could offer him something even more important: a future. The sound of approaching sirens interrupted their conversation. The Metropolitan Police had arrived, and with them, the official response. Harford stood up and took a step back, his focus momentarily shifting to the officers who were now surrounding Jessica. They had her contained, but it wasn't over. It never was, not with cases like these. The police had a job to do, and Harford would be there to support them every step of the way. One of the officers approached him, giving him a respectful nod. "Lance Corporal Harford," the officer said, his tone acknowledging both the military man and the protector that Harford had just become. "We've got this from here. You did good." Harford simply nodded. He had done his job. The rest would be handled by those trained to deal with it. As the officers began processing Jessica and securing the area, Harford turned back to Max. "Come on," Harford said gently, offering his hand. "Let's get you somewhere safe. We're not going anywhere until you're okay." Max hesitated, but only for a moment. Slowly, His small hand reached out and grasped Harford's. As they walked toward the waiting police car, the weight of what had just transpired started to settle in. Harford had broken protocol. He had acted outside of his duties as a ceremonial guard. But in that moment, nothing had been more important than protecting the boy in front of him. Max had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was no longer running from the pain. He had someone who would help him heal, who would protect him. Harford didn't know exactly what was next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to leave Max's side. Wow, what an intense and emotional journey we've just been through. Harford's quick thinking and bravery changed everything for Max, and his courageous decision to step out of his role as a ceremonial guard proves that sometimes doing what's right is more important than following protocol. But now we want to hear from you. What did you think of Harford's decision to break protocol and step in when he saw Max in danger? Do you think anyone else in the crowd would have done the same thing? And what about Max? Do you think his road to healing will be easy, or will it be a long, difficult process? Drop your thoughts, feelings, and opinions in the comments below. Was there a moment that stood out to you the most? Do you think Harford did the right thing, or should he have followed the rules? We truly value your insights, and your comments could help others understand the importance of recognizing signs of abuse and standing up for what's right. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss our next powerful story. We're excited to hear from you.